You know how some stories just stick with you, the kind that make you second guess every shadow, every sound you can't quite place. This is one of those stories. And before you ask, yeah, it's all true, every word. I was having drinks with my old college roommates last month. We do this thing where we meet up whenever Jake's back from his deployment overseas. There's 5 of us total. Jake's military. Marcus works emergency dispatch. Sarah's a night shift nurse, and Tom does search and rescue up in the mountains. Then there's me, the odd one out. I'm a radio technician for the National Weather Service. They always give me grief about having the easy job while they're out there saving lives and serving their country. But that night, after everyone had shared their war stories, literally in Jake's case, they all turned to me with that expectant look. "Come on, Dave," Sarah said, already 3 beers in. "You must have something. All those late nights alone in that weather station." I'd been dreading this moment. See, there's a story I've been carrying around for 2 years now. The kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about the world. The kind that makes you wish you'd never heard it in the first place. But there I was, 5 pairs of eyes staring at me, waiting. So I took a long sip of my beer and started talking. The assignment. Thought go. I work at a remote weather monitoring station about 80 miles north of Denver, up in the Rockies. It's one of those jobs where you're alone for days at a time, tracking storm systems, monitoring atmospheric conditions, that sort of thing. Most people would go stir crazy, but I actually prefer the solitude. The station sits on a plateau, surrounded by dense forest. The nearest town is 40 miles away, and the only way in or out is a single dirt road that becomes impassable in winter. During my shifts, which usually last 72 hours, I'm completely cut off from civilization. The building itself is pretty basic. Just a main operations room filled with monitoring equipment, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a bunk room where I sleep. The real heart of the operation is the massive radio tower that sits about 200 yards behind the building. It's one of those old-school towers, maybe 150 feet tall, with guy wires and warning lights. 2 years ago, I was working a routine shift in early October. The weather was perfect, minus clear skies, no storms in the forecast. I'd been monitoring the usual frequencies: aircraft communications, emergency services, weather data transmissions. Just another quiet night in the mountains. That's when I first heard it. I was running through my normal frequency sweep around 2 in the morning when I picked up something on 121.5 megahertz. For those who don't know radio, that's an aviation frequency minus. Specifically, it's used for air-to-air communications between aircraft. But what I was hearing wasn't normal aviation chatter. It was different. At first, it sounded like someone reading numbers, long sequences of digits, spoken in a monotone male voice with no particular accent. 749218637451192. 745192. It went on like that for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I figured it was probably just a pilot reading off some flight data, maybe coordinates or a weather report, but something about it felt off. The rhythm was too regular, too mechanical, and the numbers seemed completely random, no pattern I could identify. I made a note in my log and moved on to other frequencies, but about an hour later, I heard it again on a different frequency. Same voice, same monotone delivery, but different numbers this time. Now, I was curious. I started actively searching for the transmission, scanning through the entire radio spectrum. I found it on 6 more frequencies over the next hour, always the same voice, always different numbers, always lasting exactly 30 seconds. By 4 in the morning, I was obsessed. I'd filled 3 pages of my logbook with frequency notations and timestamps. The transmissions were coming every hour, on the hour, but always on different frequencies, and they were strong. Whoever was transmitting had serious power behind their signal. I tried to triangulate the source using the directional capabilities of our equipment. The signal was coming from somewhere in the forest, maybe 10 miles southeast of the station. But that didn't make sense. There was nothing out there. No roads, no buildings, no power lines. Just thousands of acres of wilderness. As the sun came up, the transmission stopped. I spent the rest of my shift trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe it was some kind of military exercise. Maybe it was a test of emergency broadcast systems. Maybe it was just some ham radio operator playing around. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to hear. The investigation. 2 weeks later, I was back at the station for another shift. I'd spent the intervening time researching those frequencies, looking for any official use that might explain the transmissions. I'd found nothing. This time, I was prepared. I'd brought additional recording equipment and a more sensitive directional antenna. If those transmissions started up again, I was going to document everything. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2 in the morning, the voice returned. Same monotone delivery, same 30-second duration, but now I was recording everything. 962-874-1599, 62874-1599, 62874-1599, 62874-1599, 62874-1599, 62874-1599, 62874-1599, 62874-1599. I froze. The numbers were repeating in a pattern, a specific sequence of digits, repeated over and over. 962-874-159. I grabbed my calculator and started working. The sequence was 15 digits long. When I broke it down, I realized it could be coordinates minus latitude and longitude, down to the decimal second. I plugged the numbers into my GPS software and got a hit. The coordinates pointed to a location in the forest, roughly 12 miles from the station. According to my topographical maps, it was a small clearing at the base of a rocky outcrop. No trails led to it. No roads came anywhere close. I should have left it alone. I should have filed my report, finished my shift, and gone home. But you know how it is when you're alone in the mountains for days at a time. Your judgment gets a little cloudy. I decided to investigate. The next morning, I loaded up my backpack with hiking gear and headed out. I'd been in these mountains for 3 years. I knew them pretty well, but I'd never ventured this far from the station on foot. The hike took me through some of the most beautiful wilderness I'd ever seen. Dense stands of aspen and pine, crystal clear streams, wildlife everywhere. It was the kind of place that makes you forget the outside world exists. It took me 4 hours to reach the coordinates. When I finally broke through the tree line into the clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a structure there, not a building exactly, but something that had clearly been built by human hands. It looked like a radio installation, a collection of antennas and equipment housed in weatherproof cases, all connected by thick cables that disappeared into the ground. But this wasn't any kind of official installation. The equipment was old, dating back maybe 40 or 50 years, military surplus by the look of it, and it was still active. I could hear the electrical hum of powered equipment. I approached carefully, my heart hammering in my chest. The setup was elaborate. Multiple transmitters, receivers, and some kind of automated switching system. Everything was connected to a heavy-duty power supply that must have been drawing from an underground generator. That's when I found the logbook. It was sitting on a makeshift table, protected by a plastic cover. The entries went back decades, written in different handwritings. Different people had been maintaining this installation for years, maybe generations. The most recent entry was dated just 6 months ago. Generator serviced, fuel topped off, transmission schedule maintained, 9RH. I flipped through the pages, trying to understand what I was looking at. The entries were cryptic, mostly technical notes about equipment maintenance and fuel levels, but scattered throughout were references to the protocol and maintaining the frequency. One entry from 15 years ago made my blood run cold. Lost another one last week. Jenkins went off script during his shift. They found him 3 days later, 20 miles from here. Looked like he'd been walking in circles until he died of exposure. The protocol exists for a reason. We cannot deviate. Mens M. I was so absorbed in reading that I almost missed the sound of the generator shutting down. The electrical hum ceased, and the clearing fell silent, except for the wind in the trees. And then I heard it, the voice from the radio transmissions, but now it was coming from somewhere in the forest around me. 962874159, 628741559. The same monotone delivery, the same sequence of numbers, but now I could tell it wasn't coming from the radio equipment. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the woods, maybe 100 yards away. I grabbed my backpack and started moving toward the tree line. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I had to know, I had to understand what was happening. I made it maybe 50 yards into the forest when I saw the first one. It was standing between 2 pine trees, maybe 30 feet away. At first glance, it looked like a person, human height, human proportions, but something was wrong with the way it stood, the way it held itself, too rigid, too still. And then it spoke. 962874159. The voice was coming from this thing, but its mouth wasn't moving. The sound seemed to emanate from its entire body, like a living radio speaker. I took a step backward, and that's when I saw the others. They were scattered throughout the forest, maybe a dozen of them, all standing perfectly still between the trees, all facing the same direction, all repeating the same sequence of numbers in perfect unison. My rational mind was trying to process what I was seeing. Were these people some kind of cult, an elaborate hoax? But the longer I stared, the more wrong they looked. Their proportions were slightly off. Their skin had a waxy, artificial quality, and their eyes were completely black, not dark brown or deep blue. Black, like looking into empty sockets. That's when my nerve broke. I turned and ran. I don't remember much about the hike back to the station. I was operating on pure adrenaline, crashing through the underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks. All I could think about was getting away from that clearing, away from those things standing in the forest. When I finally reached the station, I was shaking so hard I could barely operate the radio. I tried to call it in, but who was I going to tell? The sheriff? The Forest Service? Hey, I found some weird people in the woods reciting numbers. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I convinced myself I'd imagined it all. High altitude, isolation, stress from the job. I'd had some kind of breakdown, that's all. But the transmissions continued. Every shift, every night, 2 in the morning to 6 in the morning. Always the same voice, always the same coordinates, always the same sequence of numbers. And I kept monitoring them, recording them, trying to understand. The truth. 3 months later, I was having coffee with my supervisor, Carl, when he mentioned something that made my blood freeze. You know, Dave, we've been getting some strange reports from hikers in your area. People going missing, search and rescue finding them days later, wandering around like they're in some kind of trance. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. What kind of trance? Hard to describe. They're conscious, responsive to simple commands, but they can't remember where they've been or what they were doing. It's like they've been reprogrammed or something. Carl laughed at his own joke, but I wasn't laughing. I was thinking about that logbook, about Jenkins walking in circles until he died of exposure. There's something else, Carl continued. The ones we find, they keep repeating numbers, long sequences of digits, over and over, The doctors think it's some kind of neurological damage from exposure or dehydration. I knew those numbers. I'd been recording them for months. That night, I broke protocol and called in a friend who worked for the FBI, Special Agent Sarah Chen. We'd gone to college together, and she owed me a favor. "Sarah, I need you to look into something for me." Quietly. I told her about the transmissions, about the coordinates, about what I'd found in the forest. I expected her to think I was crazy, but she listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dave," she said finally, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Have you told anyone else about this?" "No, just you." "Have you filed any official reports?" "No." "Good. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You're going to stop monitoring those transmissions. You're going to destroy any recordings you've made, and you're never going to speak about this again." "Sarah, what the hell?" "Dave, I'm serious. This is bigger than you think. There are things happening in those mountains that you don't want to be involved with, trust me." She hung up before I could respond. But I couldn't let it go. I'd spent months documenting those transmissions, and now I knew they were connected to missing hikers. I had to understand what was happening. 2 weeks later, I was back at the station for what would be my last shift. I'd made my decision. I was going back to that clearing, but this time I was prepared. I had climbing gear, military surplus night vision equipment, and a satellite phone for emergency communication. I also had a theory. I'd been analyzing the pattern of the number sequences, and I'd found something disturbing. The coordinates weren't random, they were moving. Each transmission gave slightly different coordinates, tracing a path through the forest. The things I'd seen were spreading out, expanding their territory, and they were getting closer to populated areas. I reached the clearing just before sunset. The radio equipment was still there, still active, but something had changed. The installation was larger now, with new antennas and additional equipment, and there were more of them, maybe 20 or 30 figures, standing motionless in the forest around the clearing. As darkness fell, I climbed a tree about 50 yards from the clearing and settled in to observe. Through my night vision scope, I could see the figures clearly. They were identical, same height, same build, same empty black eyes, but they weren't people. They moved wrong, stood wrong, breathed wrong. At exactly 2 in the morning, they began to move. It was coordinated, purposeful. They formed a circle around the clearing, each one facing outward into the forest, and then they began to transmit. Not through the radio equipment, through themselves. The numbers poured out of them in perfect synchronization, their voices combining into a single, overwhelming signal. I could feel it in my bones, in my teeth, vibrating through my entire body. And then I understood. The coordinates weren't just locations. They were instructions. The things were creating a network, a grid that covered the entire forest. Each transmission was programming them, telling them where to go, what to do. But programming them for what? I got my answer when I heard the screaming. It was coming from the forest, maybe a quarter mile away. Humans screaming, full of terror and confusion. Through my night vision scope, I could see lights, flashlights, moving erratically through the trees. Hikers. A group of them, probably camping for the night. They'd stumbled into the transmission zone. I watched in horror as the figures began to move toward the screaming. They didn't run. They glided through the forest with an inhuman grace, closing in on the hikers from all directions. The screaming stopped abruptly. 20 minutes later, I saw the hikers emerge from the forest, but they were different now. They moved with that same rigid, mechanical gait as the other figures. Their eyes were black, empty, and they were repeating the numbers, adding their voices to the collective transmission. I climbed down from the tree and started backing away from the clearing. I'd seen enough. I understood now why Sarah had told me to stay away, why that logbook warned against deviating from the protocol. This wasn't just some isolated phenomenon. This was an invasion, a slow, systematic takeover that had been going on for decades, and I was the only one who knew about it. I made it back to the station and immediately started packing my gear. I had to get out of there, had to warn someone, but as I was loading my equipment into the truck, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The voice was coming from my radio, but it wasn't the usual transmission. It was different somehow, more urgent, more focused. David Harrison, Weather Station 77 Alpha, you have been observed. You will report to the clearing. You will join the network. Resistance is futile. It knew my name. It knew where I was. I abandoned my gear and ran for the truck. As I drove down the mountain, I could see lights in the forest, hundreds of them. Moving through the trees in perfect coordination, they were converging on the road, trying to cut me off. I made it to the main highway just as the first figures emerged from the tree line. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing on the road, perfectly still, watching me drive away. That was 6 months ago. I quit my job, moved to a different state, changed my name, but I still monitor the radio frequencies, still track the transmissions, and they're spreading. Last month, I picked up the signal near Portland. 2 weeks ago, it was outside Seattle. They're moving into populated areas now, expanding their network. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice calling my name. The warning. I look around at my friends, their faces pale in the dim light of the bar. Nobody's touched their drink in the last 10 minutes. Marcus, who deals with emergency calls every day, looks like he's going to be sick. Jesus, Dave, Jake says finally. That's not possible. I pull out my phone and show them the audio file I recorded that night. The monotone voice fills the space between us. 9628741159. 9628741159. Sarah, the nurse, recognizes it immediately. We've had patients come in repeating those exact numbers. Hikers, mostly. They were found wandering the mountains, completely dissociated. The doctors thought it was some kind of neurological damage. It's not damage, I tell her. It's programming. Tom, the search and rescue guy, is staring at his hands. How many missing hikers? He asks quietly. In Colorado? Maybe 50 over the last 2 years. But it's not just Colorado anymore. They're spreading. I show them the frequency maps I've been tracking, the pattern of transmissions moving across the country. They're building a network. Every person they take becomes part of it, becomes another transmitter. So what do we do? Marcus asks. I look around the table at these people I've known for years, these brave men and women who've dedicated their lives to helping others, and I realize there's nothing we can do. The infection is too widespread, too well established. The network is already beyond our ability to stop. We survive, I tell them. We stay out of the wilderness. We avoid isolated areas, and we hope that when they make their move, it's quick. Jake leans forward. Their move. They're not just collecting people randomly. They're building towards something, a critical mass maybe. When they have enough transmitters, enough coverage, I trail off, not wanting to finish the thought. We sit in silence for a long moment, the weight of what I've told them settling over us like a shroud. There's something else, I say finally, something I haven't told you. They look at me expectantly. 3 days ago, I picked up a new transmission, different from the others. It was broadcasting coordinates to every major city in the country, and it had a timestamp. What kind of timestamp? Sarah asks. I meet her eyes. October 31st, Halloween night, when everyone will be out, when people will be scattered across the cities, when no one will notice the missing until it's too late. Marcus checks his watch. That's in 4 days. 4 days, I confirm. And then it begins. We finish our drinks in silence. As we're leaving the bar, Tom pulls me aside. Dave, this is all really true? Everything you told us? I look up at the clear night sky, at the stars that seem somehow dimmer than they used to be. I wish it wasn't. He nods slowly. What are you going to do? I'm going to keep monitoring the signals, keep tracking their movement. Maybe I'll figure out a way to stop them, or at least slow them down. And if you can't, I don't answer him, because we both know what happens if I can't. As I walk to my car, I can feel eyes on me, not human eyes. Something else, something that's been watching me since I first heard those transmissions 2 years ago. They know where I am. They know what I know. But they're waiting for Halloween night, when they can take everyone at once. I get in my car and drive home through the empty streets, the radio crackling with static. And somewhere in that static, just at the edge of hearing, I swear I can hear them calling my name. The network is complete. The invasion is about to begin. And I'm the only one who knows it's coming. For more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And remember, if you're ever alone in the wilderness and you hear someone reciting numbers, don't investigate. Don't try to help. Just run. Because they're not people anymore. They're something else entirely. And they're looking for you.